Hello, everyone. I'm the Food Enthusiast. I'm Dara Bunjon. If you're tuning in for the first time, a little bit of background. I am a food stylist, food writer, PR maven, and frustrated baker. As always, I try to bring you someone interesting and insightful in the food industry. And today I'm very excited to have Carol Durst-Wertheim, PhD, but she just wants to be called Carol today. Carol recently wrote a book called Vignettes and Vinaigrettes. Hi, Carol. How are you?
Hi there. Hi.
Hi. A little bit about Carol. So, I don't know if you'll be able to see her blush, but she's been an advocate for women in the food industry going back just a shade before the 80s, right? Your college degree.
You can say it's been quite a few years, Dara. 40, 50 years, somewhere in there.
Okay. Well, let's talk about vignettes and vinaigrettes. This has to reflect on your time starting a catering business in the 80s. And as you say on the book, it's a memoir of catering before food was hot. How did this book evolve?
Well, I had been catering in the 80s and 90s. I relocated to Westchester in the mid 90s after I'd published a cookbook. And I found myself struggling to keep going catering as I could finish a party at 1 or 2 in the morning and drive back up home to Westchester and be up again at 5 in the morning. So I needed to make a career change for myself, and I began doing some other kinds of work in the industry. And then I began a doctorate. I was teaching at New York University in their food studies program. And Marion Nessel and I talked about her recommending me, and she put me through rewriting my application essay. But I did decide to go to the Union Institute and University for a doctorate. And the dissertation, the large paper that you write about, I wrote about women working in the food industry. And part of my research work became these stories about catering. I had taken a workshop as part of the doctorate in writing about work, and it was the key. It was totally what I wanted to write about. But I didn't really want to write about an academic work. And then life came and went and got me interrupted, and I went in different directions. And finally I said, okay, it's time to finish this. It's a lot of years later. Some things have changed, some things have not changed in the food industry and in work for women. And it's just a kind of piece that needed to be finished, just needed to be finished for me.
Well, we talked, women aren't putting their stories out there. There are many stories to be told. And as I said, you've been an advocate for women for quite a number of years. You've started off as the the coordinator of the New York State Department of Labor Displaced Homemakers Program. And you wrote a grant matching the federal, state, and New York City funding of a 10 statewide employment support center. Nonprofit advancing women's careers, and a college career counselor. So you've always been there, but this evolved into the New York Restaurant School and your work there. Tell us a bit more about that.
Well, when I was working for the state government, I was in my 20s, and I was looking at what happened for women in their 50s, 60s, 70s. They were the displaced homemakers then, the women who had to come back into the labor market later on. And one of the things we did was a large conference. And attending that conference was a fellow named Bill Lederman, who was trying to get started with a restaurant school. And he was talking about it being a great option for people who wanted to change careers, people who could come to school for a few months, get some new skills training, and come back into a labor market. So he kind of engaged me. I came down from the World Trade Center. I was on the 73rd floor. And walked into a construction site where we created a program that allowed people to enter the food industry after 18 weeks. And after running the program for about 2 years and working with the faculty and sorting out the curriculum and doing all the administrative stuff, I resigned as the director and I took the course. And I walked out of the program and set up my own catering business. And that was my evolution into the food industry.
Was your first job, or one of the ones you wrote about, was a personal chef to a certain star? Was
Yes.
that the first job outside of school?
No, when I first finished the training, someone who had been a caterer and I knew said she had signed a non-compete clause and she could not book this big party and she wanted me to take the party. And so my very first party was cocktails for 300 at Brunswick and Fee, which is a wonderful fabric house. Only they were re-releasing 17th century themed fabrics. And of course, I was into 20th century food, and what did I know? And so this friend gave me a crash course in ancient food, and we found our way to putting it together, and I hired a number of my classmates, and that's how I launched my catering business. And about a month after that, I was called by the placement office from the school, and they needed somebody who could be discreet, who could work for someone famous and not reveal personal secrets. That was the criteria.
You can reveal his name, but you can't reveal the secrets. But why don't you go ahead and tell people who it was that you personally?
Well, it was Al Pacino, whom I admired greatly, and he has such a distinctive face. It's just not possible for him to walk into a diner or a cafe or a restaurant without being recognized. And when he was working on a show called American Buffalo, he needed to be on backstage by, early for an 8 o'clock curtain, and he needed his dinner, and he didn't need to be approached by strangers. So my main qualification, I had to audition for him and cook, and then it was very important that I not tell anybody what he ate or the arrangements we had or where he lived. And I haven't seen him in nearly 40 years, and I still won't tell you what he ate.
Well, that's okay. He probably can't even remember from 40 years ago. But of course, maybe your food is that memorable, he does. I'm not sure what I ate 2 days ago. It was the 80s and the start of the 80s, and I don't think people realized how things change, what New York was like at that time. That was Studio 54. And didn't you do something there? You were telling me something about Studio 54. Some of it's in the book. Why don't you fill us in?
Well, I had done some events for big theater companies and some fundraisers for different organizations. So I did actually do some catering in the property, which was called Studio 54, but after, the big scene. And Ian Schrager and Paul Rubel had moved on from there, and they'd taken over a place downtown, which was going to be used for Mick Jagger's 40th birthday party. So I was called in as a subcontractor on that one. I'm dating myself now for sure, but I actually worked for a bunch of different stars and famous people, mostly because I would keep my mouth shut. But the story about Mick Jagger's party is in the book, and kind of a stunning one, what it looks like backstage.
Right. Well, let me remind people, the book is called Vignettes and Vinaigrettes, a memoir of catering before food was hot. You can find it on Amazon.com. You can find it in book or Kindle fashion, I think Barnes & Nobles. Am I correct?
Yes. And also Kitchen Arts and Letters in New York City is carrying it.
Okay. Wonderful. We talked about go ahead.
I was going to say that in the 80s, food was very different. We were all very, very excited about Nouvelle cuisine and learning first about European cuisines. And it was very wonderful to see fresh new products and specialty products. It was a very exploratory time, and a time when a lot of new businesses were burgeoning. And the restaurant industry was in tremendous change. but there were very few women chefing at that time, very few. And it was really hard to get money to back any kind of a food business if it was a woman in charge.
And it's probably still a situation that we're going through.
It's still very difficult, but back then you could not walk into a bank as a woman business owner and get a bank loan, get a business loan. It's gotten better. It's not perfect yet. So a lot of women who are sort of thinking, oh, I can cook, I can go into the food business, oh, it's easier to start. Well, I thought it was easier to start with catering, that it engaged less of a capital investment than bricks and mortar. I thought it would be a way to get in and to start to make friends and relationships that would lead into catering. And it worked for me. I was catering for about 15 years. But I think it's much more difficult now. It does take more money invested. And these days you have a lot of specialty foods and a lot of people doing private chef work. There are other ways into the catering than there were back in the 80s.
Right. And well, you now have all the food allergies that come and the
That too.
vegan,
That too.
vegetarianism. And, for a short period of time in my life, you've had many jobs in the food industry that paid you. And I can look back at my career and I can probably top the amount of jobs that I got paid for. But there was a short period when I worked for a caterer, and to a caterer than a restaurant that did off-site banquets and things of that nature. And I know how hard it is, and as close as you sit there with that checklist to make sure you have everything. Is there not the moment that you remember that you get to the site and that one box was left behind? Do you have a nightmare story like that?
More than one, unfortunately. Running out of cream for the coffee in the middle of Staten Island on a Saturday night, when I had to put somebody into a car and that person didn't know where they were, and this was before GPS. So finding a deli to go, or a grocery store somewhere in the middle of Staten Island, was rather a challenge. Another time I forgot the coffee pot, and I was up in far reaches of Westchester County for a very elegant dinner party. And it just so happened that one of the staff had a coffee pot in his car and rescued me. It was just by coincidence. But yes, that always happened. And you could even boil water and start brewing things other ways through a sieve in the kitchen if you had to. But one could be very creative as a caterer. One had to be.
Well, yeah, you have to be innovative, and I think that comes with any chef, whether male or female, that things happen, and how do you deal with that crisis? I always relate. Well, what about me? There was people know about it. I was a PA to Stephen Reichlin on one of his shows. His personal assistant got sick last minute. My girlfriend threw me in. And they were doing the beauty shot on the salsa, but they only made like a quarter of a cup and they had a big container. So I stuffed the thing with paper towels and just put it on top. You have to think on your feet when you're in the food business. You say that you benefited or you were involved with the second wave of feminism.
Yes.
Let's talk about that.
Well, given my age, I was a bit younger than Gloria Steinem and able to read her words. And I had worked at an organization called Catalyst, which back in the 70s was involved with helping women get onto corporate boards, helping women return to the labor market. It's not quite so obvious today, but years ago there was quite a bit of age discrimination and a great number of limitations on women who were seeking professional opportunities. At that point, law school was, 3% or 5% female. Medical school was less than 10% female. And Catalyst was involved with trying to open up more opportunities for women. So it was a wonderful place for me to be a researcher. And I was working on a program to help undergraduate women continue to take what is today known as STEM education that would open up opportunities for them to get into the maths and sciences and the much more lucrative professions. And along in that time, I was looking and thinking about the food industry. And the only thing they had available, the only information that was available was to be a nutritionist or to be like a food service person in a large institution. And that really wasn't appealing to me. And as I started to think some more, I said, well, gee, I think I'd like to have my own business someday. Would the food industry be possible? And the possibility that opened for me at first was catering. And then I went on to 24 other kinds of work, but I was always a freelancer. So I was able to earn my own way and be my own boss. And I think that's all due to what was opened up because of those women who came before us.
And I think in the book or the notes, you said something, you had a Me Too moment.
Yes.
I think most women have had a Me Too moment. Do you care to discuss it?
I was in college, as an undergraduate college, as an art major. I had had a significant amount of art education in high school in New York City. And my first semester at college, I came into the art room and the art teacher asked everybody individually, but he asked all the women over 5'7" to model for him privately. And I refused. I wasn't interested. And the evaluation that he wrote from my first semester in art included the line, like, it's too bad Carol couldn't grow beyond her limited high school knowledge of art. And I changed major. By second semester of college, I was no longer an art major, although I had significant art experience before that, and I had significant visual skills, but I did not complete anything as an art major.
It's a shame that it's the benefit us that you changed directions. But
maybe
it's a shame that, but it's a shame that you had to divert yourself.
Well, I think that's the difference now with the Me Too movement. By people coming forward, they do not have to accept the limitations. In the years that I'm talking about, 69, 70, 71, there were no people to talk to about this. They didn't call it a Me Too moment. They did not have the capacity for me to file a complaint anywhere. There was no, sexual harassment infrastructure anywhere. There was no counseling anywhere. So it was a question of, either I chose to model for him, which I chose not to do, or I went my own way. And that's the kind of gatekeeper that I think women still find in the food industry. We still see it with some of the men who have been powerful in the entertainment industry. And in a lot of different places, there are individuals who can shut the door and really limit a career. And it takes a certain shifting of gears to move to something else. And some women are able to do that, and some women are devastated. And I think, lose a lot.
Right. I have a question. What's been the most challenging or exotic culinary experience you've ever had?
Exotic culinary experience.
That's what they're asking.
That's what they're asking, huh?
Challenging or exotic culinary.
Well, I found it challenging once I was doing food for a TV show. Rosie O'Donnell had a television show, and I was doing a segment, and then the floor manager, the TV studio manager, had some corned beef and cabbage delivered from the deli or restaurant downstairs, and he needed a beauty shot. And he had no pans, he had no plates, he had nothing but the camera. And his guys who brought the food upstairs managed to bump it over a step. So everything that was in hotel pans got mushed up and mixed up. And it was, he needed the beauty shot. And I had about 45 seconds to sort things out and figure it out. And I did. And he got his beauty shot. And everybody ate the corned beef and cabbage before he had a chance to touch up the shot or to do anything else. But I found that a rather interesting thing to do. As you described, the TV camera work is extremely challenging. In terms of exotic food, I'd like to think that the adventures going to the specialty food trade conventions, they would come every year to New York, to Houston, to San Francisco, and I would find that an education because there could be up to 25,000 different displays of specialty products, of innovations, of people who wanted to break into the food industry and were trying to figure out, can they make the best salsa? Can they come up with a different jam? Can they organize food paper goods that were recyclable? And watching all of those innovations go from, way out there, who's doing this, to mainstream, it's very interesting to see that. And
Yeah,
I think that's really been the most delight of the food industry. I think you and I have bumped into each other at a few of those food shows that are really just eye-opening.
the fancy food show, and we met through women chefs and restaurateurs. And we
Yes,
were talking just the other day. I remembered Atlanta. We did the conference, and it
yes,
was late at night, and a group of us women chefs were doing a couple, or maybe three, or maybe five cocktails in the bar at the hotel. I remember that night, and I did run into you at a special event in New York that I went up to. That I think was young women chefs that were promoting. I have a couple questions that I ask. You and I could talk forever, but let me emphasize to people that I don't know, I'll probably show in reverse. Here's the book, Vignettes and Vinaigrettes, and that link has on the notes have scrolled up, and you can find it there, Vignettes and Vinaigrettes by Carol Durst-Wertheim. You can find it on Amazon. You can find it at Books and Letters in New York?
it's called Arts and Letters, and it's a
Arts and
cookbook
Letters.
bookstore up on
I
Lexington Avenue in New York City.
yeah, it's somebody's. If you like cookbooks, that's where you should always go. You'll lose your mind, which I did. You don't walk out of there with nothing in your hand if you like to
That's
cook.
right.
There are a million books and a history of books. But okay, so let's go back to the questions. My one question: what was your epic culinary fail?
My epic culinary failure.
Fail. Yes.
Is that right? The
Could
failure is what you want?
yes. I told people about mine when you think you got something right, or something that you made. Look, when you started at the New York restaurant school, did you know how to cook? I mean, what were
Oh,
you cooking
no.
then?
No, I was not very much of a cook. I was the administrator. And just watching some stunning cooking education, it drew me in. It drew me in. So I don't think my failures were so much in terms of the cooking. I think they came a little bit later into my catering business, if I can tell one of the stories or part of a story that's in the book. Um,
Okay.
I, I had a child, my son Will, and I was carrying him in a snuggly and unfortunately fell down a flight of stairs. And I fell on my back so I wouldn't land on top of him. And got up and walked to an appointment I had and realized something was wrong with my ankle. And sure enough, the ankle was broken. And, that's part of the story you'd have to read. But it was about 3 days later that I was promising a cocktail party after a show at the Cherry Lane Theater in Greenwich Village. And the day before this show, I was supposed to come out as a surprise for the audience. At the end of the show, there were supposed to be miraculously cocktails and hors d'oeuvres appearing in the lobby. But before the show, 3 days before the show, or 2 days, a building fell down 2 doors away from the Cherry Lane Theater. It was not an explosion, it was nothing terrorist, it was just a building from the 1700s collapsed. So there were barricades all around the theater and for blocks around. And I think my culinary failure, well, I First, I learned how to give a shopping list to someone else. It took me 3 hours to explain my shopping list for someone else to get through Fairway. And then I learned how difficult it is to get around on crutches, through police barricades, handling trays of hors d'oeuvres, and getting into a stairwell in an 18th century building. So we were setting up from a stairwell and then had this whole display miraculously appear at the end of the theater with no one noticing that I had a cast on my foot. I lost my crutches that night. I broke the cast, and I've never worn high heels successfully since then.
I remember somewhere in your notes that you used to wear 4-inch stilettos.
Well, at 27 I could, but at 34, I wasn't doing that anymore.
No, I wear what I call bubby shoes. They have a strap around. I have been known to fall off of shoes. So the last question is, what question didn't I ask you that I should have?
Well, I think it comes down to our aging and working. And I reached a point in my catering business that I felt I can't handle the stamina that's required. Those 18, 19-hour days were just, taking a toll on me. And I had to change my work. And I think we're seeing now, certainly in response to this COVID virus, a lot of work is going to be changing. And I think it's extremely important for people to stay connected one way or another in whatever field you're involved with. But particularly in the food industry, I am seeing a lot of restaurants changing over to catering, to drop off food, to pickups. Everybody is rethinking going into a restaurant to sit down to a plate of food, and they're figuring out, how can I have something in the safety of my home? I don't think that's going to go away. If anything, I think anybody interested in doing personal chef work or private nutritional counseling or prepared meals, I think that's going to be what's going to increase. And if we happen to be older and we understand how to do that kind of food organization and safe food transport, I think that's what's going to be out there. And I think there's going to be a lot of need to address the food insecurity. There were a lot of kids who were getting 1 or 2 meals a day in school, and that may not be happening come the fall. I think that we need to make some adjustments to make sure our children are fed and fed well, and that our seniors, those people who are shut in, are taken care of. And some of us seniors are going to have to take care of other seniors. That's just what lies ahead.
Well, it's taking care of your neighbor, your family member.
Yes.
And yes, restaurants are readapting. And as I said, here in Baltimore, they just closed the restaurants in-house dining again. It was initially closed. It's been open maybe 4 weeks, something like that. So it's more outdoor dining or drop-off boxes, prepared food.
And knowing how to cook and knowing how to coordinate meals certainly going to be a skill that we need on into the future.
Absolutely. Carol, everyone, Carol Durst-Wertheim, we thank you for joining us. The book is Vignettes and Vinaigrettes. You can find it on Amazon.com, Kindle or book, and you'll find that link in the notes for the show. Carol, we will talk again. Continued success in all your endeavors.
Thank you so much, and stay well, stay safe, Dara. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye. Next week, the guest will be Jeffrey Spear, and it's a book that he's just written called My Life in Gluttony, about his world travels and the recipes, and a culinary adventure. You can always find this video on the Facebook page, on jmoreliving.com, and YouTube. You can reach me at food@jmoreliving.com. I thank you always for sharing the show with your friends, people who will be interested in the discussions that we have. Stay safe, wear your mask, and may your plates always, always remain full.